Persuading people to take the actions we want can be hard. Our teams and clients are bombarded with thousands of messages every single day. But there is a way for you to get above the noise. Stories. This is the Stories with Traction podcast, and I'm your host, Matt ZAUN. Join my guests and me as we unpack the power of storytelling. We'll talk about topics like leadership, sales, and marketing, all through the lens of strategic storytelling. Enjoy this episode. I'm excited for this episode because not only do I have one of my favorite people, but we're going to be talking about one of my favorite topics, which is storytelling. So for those of you who listen to the podcast, you know that my guest is not a stranger. It is Terence Farrell. We've done numerous episodes together. Some of the ones that we've done are stories of leadership, how to get involved in politics, how to build a legacy, how hobbies make you more creative, strategic networking, great mentorship, and now we are going to talk about storytelling. So I want to dive in, talk about different aspects of storytelling so you yourself can be a better storyteller. So for those of you who might not be familiar with Terence or might not have listened to the other episodes, which I would encourage you to do so, they will be in the show notes. Terence Farrell has served as a Chester County Commissioner for 12 years. And before that, he was the Recorder of Deeds for 8 years. Today, he is the president of For Real Solutions, a consulting firm that brings value to its clients through leveraging Terence's knowledge, experience, network, and creativity. Two of the major focuses for his business are reducing healthcare costs for various organizations and mitigating loss in pension funds that occur because of fraud or other illegal activities. Welcome back to the show, Terence.
Thank you very much, Matt. It's great to be back. And before we dive in, I really have to send you my kudos for hitting that 100th podcast episode, Stories with Traction. That's a tremendous story in and of itself.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. And you were a big part of that with the 7 that we've done thus far. You were a really big part of that. So I think I am very appreciative of all the insights that you have shared, a lot of the lessons learned based on your career. And for people that are tuning in right now that they might not have listened to the other episodes we put out, Terence and I have a lot of history. I was able to witness firsthand Terence and a lot of aspects of his leadership. And I remember when I was much younger, watching him and seeing him do what he does and thinking to myself, wow, that is an incredible leader, someone to learn from. And along the way, I've known you now for coming up on 15 years, which sounds crazy to me that it's been that. It's amazing how quickly time flies. But in that time, I've learned so much, and I appreciate you sharing that during a lot of these episodes for sure. So I want to touch on a topic today that captures a lot of different aspects of your journey, as well as, your career, not only in business, but also in life as well, which is the storytelling piece. So when we first started our different episodes, the very first one that we did, we went through from point A to point B, how you got into the position that you were holding as an elected official. And it's amazing all of the different messages and stories that need to be shared in order to do that. So sometimes people might call them, whether it's speeches or talks or messages, but ultimately there are stories within those talks that connect to an audience. So can you speak to that with all the different things that you were doing to get out in front of people? One of the images that a lot of people think of when they think of politics is someone on a stage connecting with others, really trying to persuade and convince that audience to buy into their ideas. So can you talk about different aspects of storytelling that you used within your career?
Well, thanks for that introduction. And yes, stories and storytelling, communication, as a general topic, very important to succeeding in politics, to being a leader that people believe being a leader whose vision people buy into. And it's not just the speeches, which were an incredibly important part of my my journey as a county commissioner, also as a recorder of deeds, but also the one-on-one stories that you're talking with people about when you're one-on-one with somebody, not only telling your story, but listening to their story and incorporating feedback that makes them realize or understand that you understand where they're coming from, that their story is important. But true, when I realized that I wanted to be a county commissioner, one of the things I embarked upon was learning how to be a better storyteller, how to be a better communicator, how to be better at speaking, how to use dramatic elements in my speech to enhance what I was saying, to help people be inspired. So storytelling and various aspects were key along the way. I remember as recorder of deeds, I went to a number of conferences. Our national one was called IACRIOT, which was the International Association of Clerks, Recorders, Election Officials, and Treasurers. Not enough people in either of those individual groups to hold a conference, but put them all together and we had a conference. And every time at one of those conferences, I would have take an elective to learn how to be a better communicator, be a better storyteller. And one of these seminars was about using theatrical elements in your speeches, whether it's, a dramatic pause, such as that one, or whether it's, varying the rhythm of your speech, speaking slower and then speeding it up, so that people had a variety of different paces so that they were not lulled to sleep. So I did study. I am by trade, I guess, a writer. I was an English major. My parents were English majors or teachers at Lincoln University. I enjoyed fiction. I enjoyed poetry. I enjoy a story. Just like all human beings, I think we all relate to stories.
So you brought up some good points that I want to talk about and dive a little bit deeper. But first, I want to make a point based on what you said. You talked about that, yes, the importance of being on stage, connecting, but also that one-on-one connection. And one of the things I don't want people to miss is the importance of connecting one-on-one over storytelling. And there's so much to be said about building trust and likability through stories. And when it comes to being out there and getting votes, it's amazing how powerful trust and likability is. In fact, there's numerous studies that show that people that are likable are voted on more. Like, likability is so important. And when it comes to not only politics, but also in business, it's amazing how many business leaders talk about them wanting to create a vibrant company culture. My question back to them would be, do your people feel that they can really trust you and that you're a likable person? And hopefully, but if you want more trust and more likability, a really good place to look to is really good listening and then connecting to that listening through storytelling. So I very much appreciate that you made a point to mention the importance, Terence, of one-on-one storytelling. I want to dive into the theatrical piece because I hear you, and I'm in agreement with you on many fronts. I refer to it as stage dynamics, but there are people that when you start saying theatrical, they think like a Broadway play, or they think different elements of movement, and almost as if they are forcing the stories. But I want to talk to the importance of the theatrics. So can you dive a little bit deeper what you mean regarding adding these different elements of theatrics to storytelling?
Well, and an essential story grabs, particularly in quote unquote fiction, grabs the listener, the viewer, and they are willing to suspend disbelief, cynicism, and dive into the story itself. Now, you could say that any story will grab a listener, but that's not true. If you have the best Shakespeare and it's presented in a monotone that no one can, be inspired by the the poignancy of Romeo and Juliet or the tragedy of Hamlet. They're going to be missed because the presentation is not up to good standards. You know, I've seen various presentation of Shakespeare plays, and he's one of my favorite authors. I've seen professional performances, and I've seen high school performances. And I just must say that when someone has the element of being able to project and convey the emotion that's involved in the story, it grabs you by the lapels and pulls you into that story. So in the best storytelling, the quote unquote theatrics or the presentation are go by the wayside because you're focusing on the story and it's being presented in such a dynamic, enthralling fashion that you're drawn into it. You know, when you're talking one-on-one, and I appreciate that, and I appreciate your underscoring the fact that all a person who is in political realm wants from a person he's talking to primarily is for that person's vote. You know, sometimes it's that person's treasure. But in order to get that vote, the person needs only to like you. You know, they might agree with your policy, they might not. But if they liked you and they go into the voting booth, that's a strong reason to vote for you. So put the theatrics aside or incorporate them, but get to a story that draws the reader, the audience, the person into that personal story. So the theatrics or the dynamics or the craft, really, the craft of storytelling is important, and the craft of presentation is also important.
Outstanding point. So one of the things regarding the theatrical piece is the importance of delivery. And it's amazing how many speakers that I've heard over the years that might not have the most amazing content in the world. So the talk itself might not be the most incredibly written speech, but their delivery is so powerful. It's so good that that mediocre talk actually becomes a really powerful message. So I want to stress from the theatrical perspective, you know, the movement of the body, proper eye contact, moving forward, maybe moving back, all these different things keep the audience engaged. So it's so important. Now, there's one thing I want to mention regarding the emotion piece, because you lightly touched on it, but I want to dig a little bit deeper. So there are a lot of different human emotions that people can experience. I would recommend listeners, you know, go look into that. Even if you were to Google something as simple as emotion wheel, you will see tons and tons of different emotions. However, when it comes to us presenting to an audience, when it comes to business or the political world, there's really only 4 emotions that are overwhelming when it comes to those different environments. So the 4 emotions are excited, angry, fearful, and surprised. So everyone listening, I want you to think whether you've been involved in a business transaction, whether you're trying to sell someone, whether it comes to marketing, when you are speaking at a staff meeting and you get up and maybe you're edifying one of your employees in front of someone, and you think about all those dynamics, the overwhelming majority of the emotions that come to the surface are excited, angry, fearful, and surprised. Those are very powerful drivers. So I want to dig into those, Terence. So when it comes to politics, let's start with a negative emotion. Clearly, fear is a powerful, powerful driver when it comes to the political arena. If I can convince someone that this individual is a horrible choice to vote for and to create an element of fear, they will go to the ballot box and vote for someone else, right? So let's talk about fear when it comes to the political world. What are your thoughts regarding now? Fortunately or unfortunately, that's really the way our politics have become lately. But let's talk about the element of fear. What have you seen regarding fear when it comes to storytelling in the political arena?
Well, you see it all the time around election time. The TV ads, the mailers are full of, wrought with negative campaigning. You know, it's not so much what I will do or what the candidate will do to better the community. It's more if you elect my opponent, these horrible things will happen because that person is terrible. That person was convicted of this, or was charged with that. So negative campaigning is a huge part of politics, and as you say, the fear of missing out on opportunity is maybe even stronger than the positive emotion of getting something as a benefit. Because one thing you don't want to do is get eaten by the saber-toothed tiger out there, which is fear is a primal mechanism for survival. So it is very, very strong, and you see it all the time in politics as people try to make you afraid of the opposition or afraid of a competing vision. So you're exactly right. Fear is a primal motivator in politics and in life.
Now, we're talking politics for the moment, but I want people to think of sales. One of the most powerful drivers is fear. And think of all the different fears that one of your prospects or clients might have. For everyone listening, I want you to really think about that. Most of the objections, most of the questions, most of they're scratching their heads, asking themselves if it's worth the investment. All of it's based on fear. Maybe they're afraid of how they'll look to their superiors by going and doing this purchase. Maybe they're afraid of looking stupid because of what they've done. Maybe they're afraid of not being able to trust the organization or business that they're investing in the product or service. It's all based on fear. So yes, we're talking politics, but I want people to recognize one of the most powerful drivers in the business world when it comes to emotions as well is that fear aspect.
You're exactly
Let's talk.
right.
What's that?
You're exactly right. And I'm in business. I was in politics, but I'm in business now. So I understand that concept. Fear of missing out, fear of embarrassment, fear of taking something that people are going to look at you and say, I can't believe you actually bought into that. Whatever, fear.
Sure, absolutely. So that's one of the negative emotions. Then there's the other negative emotion, which is the anger piece. Often when it comes to business, we don't want to talk about anger for whatever reason. We feel uncomfortable regarding anger, but it's something that we shouldn't overlook. One of the things that I found is often when someone is trying to connect with another individual, let's say prospect or client, and there's an objection, and the objection is made out of anger, and we recognize that, it might not be a personal attack on that person. They might not be angry at that person. What might be happening is they are thinking of a story that relates to one of their competitors, and they're throwing them in the same basket as one of their competitors. So basically what they're thinking is maybe they've reached out for the similar services and they got burnt by that organization. They still need the services, but the experience is bringing back those stories, and they're coming up with objections or comments or questions based on that anger. Now, when it comes to politics, Terrence, that anger is more than not, it's an emotion that comes out quite often. It's really important for us to recognize it and connect with that. So can you speak to different aspects of anger that you've experienced through your career?
Well, in politics, but then I'll get back to business. In politics, there, as everybody knows now, there's a lot of anger nationally in national politics, party against party, candidates against candidates. It used to be we could have civil discourse about varying policies and opposing points of view, but no longer. If one party says the sky is blue, the other party angrily says it's red. I don't know how we got to that position. Maybe it's through the the proliferation of political channels so that you can watch news that only supports your point of view. Maybe it's through the use of iPhones so that everybody gets their point of view on their iPhones. I don't know, but there's a lot of anger in politics. And reverting back to business, when people do express anger at something you're offering or something that's tangential to what you're offering, it presents an opportunity really to listen, Matt, because there is, as you say, there's a story behind that. There's emotion, the emotion of anger, but there may be additional emotions. And it's a chance for you to dig deeper and find out where that anger is really coming from, and maybe be able to deal with that. So when people express anger or any emotion when you're talking to them, when you're networking with them, it's an opportunity to find out what story they're telling themselves, so that you can buy into that story or look into that story and maybe change the narrative somewhat.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Changing the narrative, the importance of utilizing that emotion, connecting with it through story to take them to the other side of the mountain through that story, with that story. So I appreciate you mentioning that. So we just touched on two negative emotions. Let's touch on the other two. So surprise is a wild card, right? Because surprise could be positive or negative. It could be confusion and dismay, or it could be surprise with intrigue and interest. It's amazing when we do research and we find out different stats that people might not be aware of, and we're surprised and we're excited to share that surprise with others, and they're intrigued. And back to your point of the theatrics and almost like an entertaining aspect to connect, it can be very entertaining at times to get information that we've never heard before. So there's the surprise piece, and then also the excited piece, firing up an audience, really rallying them, getting them excited, getting them to the point where it's more interesting and engaging listening to that person in front of them versus scrolling on their phone. So can you touch on those two? Can you touch on the surprise and excited when it comes to communication?
Well, I'll touch on first the excitement. And, if you're excited at an event, there's adrenaline flowing, there's particular hormones, dopamine that's flowing, and you go home with that feeling. It's almost like a drug. Excitement is in many ways a drug. I remember one of the political activists that often came to Chester County. She is since deceased, but her name was Renee Moore, and she might have crossed your path from time to time. But she was an exciting speaker. She could come in at the beginning of a rally, at the beginning of a convention, beginning of a dinner, and she exuded excitement, which was contagious. And so, if you weren't excited about, the candidates or the prospects for that year, Renee could, light a fire under you that you would take home and spread to other people. The surprise aspect is kind of interesting because in any crafted story, and you'll see, on TV, there's always a surprise turning of events, something you never saw coming, which indeed, draws you in, enhances your interest. And, you pointed out doing research and finding out various things that surprise you along the way. Well, the best thing to do with that surprise, those surprising facts or information, is to use that as you build your story about your vision or whatever you're building the story about. And then, you've got the audience following, but then you really can plan a hook with a surprise that they don't see coming, that they, have enough trust in you because they've been listening to you. And that surprise, it ignites a feeling of excitement also, really. It's something I didn't see, something I didn't know. There's adrenaline flowing again. So I think those elements are, key elements of any great story.
I appreciate you mentioned that. And especially when you said excitement is like a drug, it's amazing how many people, well, we all love dopamine hits, right? And there's so many different ways that we can get those dopamine hits. It's amazing when a speaker can channel that and they can connect with an audience and really bring out that excitement. So speaking of the audience, I do want to shift gears, but I want to touch on this because I've been fascinated when it comes to this one point, as it pertains to you, Terence, because as I had mentioned before, I've been able to witness you for years doing what you've done, being at large events, connecting with audiences, quote unquote, working a room, and seeing you at these events. One of the things that has always amazed me is your ability to connect with everyone, connect with people regardless of what generation they're from, what background they have, what kind of profession they have. It's very the skill set you have when it comes to connectivity is incredible. One of the things in the marketing world that I like to talk about is an ICP/C. So for those listening that aren't familiar with that, it is an ideal client persona or community. So basically, it's someone building an image in their mind of who their ideal client would be, and then thinking about it from a community perspective. So as an example, the family situation someone's client might be in. You know, are they single? Are they a single parent? Are they married? Are they married and empty nesters? Maybe they're married and they have grandchildren. All of these different stages in life, those individuals might connect with different stories. Then it goes even deeper. You know, what generation are they from? Are they baby boom? Are they a baby boomer? Generation X, millennial, Gen Z? A lot of these generations are becoming, you know, some of them are very dominant in the workplace, right? So it's very important to recognize that the generation, the highest level of education they have, different job responsibilities, because this changes the way that we are sharing different stories. Because there's a story that might land really great with a baby boomer, but it's not going to land with Generation Z. And I bring all this up because you have mastered the art of connecting across the board. So I want to talk to you about that. Do you think there's some type of training that you've received in your life? Do you think it was more instinctual just because of all the thousands of talks you've given over the last few decades? How did you get to the point where you can connect with people from every stage of life?
Well, I think first of all, it starts out with liking people. When you like people, you then want to hear their stories. Where did they come from? What do they have in common with you? And it's very easy to share your own story when you hear elements of your story in the person you're talking to, or that person hears elements of your story. So first of all, and there are politicians who don't like people, who don't like the stage, and they're fairly good at faking it. But I think, you know, you mentioned being able to connect with people from various walks of life, generations, backgrounds, etc. Because you know, I've gone through a lot of different stages in my life, done a lot of different things, been in a lot of different situations, and those are all human situations. You know, when you talk about some of the great writers, whether they're playwriters or poets or whatever, they are revealing aspects of the human condition that you as a reader relate to, so you can understand and maybe be that emotion that you're feeling can be deepened because that writer sees something, but there has to be some initial connection. So I think first of all, you know, I like people. I like the, you know, understanding, being a student of the human condition. And I try to be authentic. You know, I've been there, I've done that in many, many cases. You know, I don't have to make up stuff, you know, that I've been through. And I've been through, what what people know about me probably is the tip of the iceberg of what I've been through in my 70 plus years of living on this planet.
That's an important point that I want to get to. I want to stress something that you said, but I want to get to the point of it. Really, the word that's coming to my mind is empathy. So we'll get there in a moment. But I do want to stress. You said the importance of liking people. So when you said that, the idea of curiosity came to my mind. You know, I during the first year of COVID, I spent a great deal of time reading biographies. And some autobiographies as well. But I spent that year just reading tons of different biographies, and I was making a list of different attributes that some of these incredible people had. All right, whether they were inventors or artists or maybe a movie star or business guru. And one of the attributes on that list was curiosity. They were highly curious people. So when they found out about a certain topic, subject, they were very curious regarding that topic, never going into it thinking that they know everything about it. They would dive deeper and they asked great questions. It all came back to curiosity. And one of the things when you said about you liking people and being someone that likes people is you're a highly curious person, Terence, when you are connecting with others. And I think I mentioned the story to you that we were at an event. This is a long time ago. It was well over a decade ago, and my wife was with me. And you had a conversation with my wife. You found out a little bit about what she does as a profession, and then we were at an event. This is several months later, and you went up to her and you immediately went into asking her about what was happening at her work. And you asked really engaging, curious questions. She remembers that conversation to this day. In fact, I remember her talking about it. Had such a powerful connection when it came to that curiosity. So I just wanted to stress that point, the importance of being curious with other people and actually not only liking people, but being curious about it, which brings out that likability.
Yeah, being curious about it in an authentic kind of way. It's not just to ask a question for asking a question, but to find out a little bit about more about what what Courtney is feeling. What is going on in her life right now. And when you're authentic, whether it's the empathy or some kind of telepathic communication. I'm not sure exactly, how communication actually takes place. Face-to-face communication involves, all of the things that happen when you look at somebody's face, but the tone of their voice, the movement of their body, etc. There's what's happening on the surface, and then there's so much more about how the energy is conveyed between people. But when you're actually seriously interested in somebody, then that makes an impression. It burns and some kind of image into you. You did ask about whether there are quote unquote techniques you can learn, and I guess you underscored it really, or peeled back the onion of basically asking questions. It's an old cliche that we have two ears and one mouth, so we should probably listen twice as much as we do talk. But when there are techniques of just what happened next, and that's the beginning of a great story. If you have that question in your mind, you're hooked. What happened next, and why did you do that, and did something happen before this to make you move into that space? So when asking the questions, and the way to remember something is by creating a story about that person in your own mind. When you have enough pieces, it might not be the full, complete, accurate story, but it's a story that you can remember, so that when you see that person the next time, that story comes to the forefront, and you're willing to and able to re-engage in that person's story.
So I appreciate you mentioning the authenticity, because I have seen people that it's almost like a check the box, where it's so forced, it's so calculated. They're just going down a running list when it comes to questions. And that comes across as almost a repellent. Like, people don't like that. They want that authenticity. And I think a big part of it is the importance of going into it with a new lens. Even though we might understand it a little bit, but being so curious because the other person's experience and perspective might be different. So as an example, let's say, Terence, you and I are at an event. I know you play guitar. Okay. So I don't play guitar, so I don't know too much about practicing when it comes to guitar or all the ins and outs of guitar. But I've seen numerous people play a guitar. I know what the instrument is. I know the basic premise of it. So even though I know what a guitar is, even though I understand it, I have some of my favorite musicians that are really good when it comes to guitar. I might go into that conversation with a new lens on your experience when it comes to playing guitar might be different than the musicians I listen to. So the curiosity, and based on what I've learned from you, is being curious about it, going into it, asking you questions about maybe different bands that you're involved with right now, and your journey at this point when it comes to guitar. So I think it's really important, because I've seen so many people that they have this mindset of, I know what it's about, I've heard it, I've seen it, I've done it. You know, you mentioned all the different decades in your career. You're in your 70s now, so would be very easy for you to look at people thinking to yourself, I've lived it, I've done it, I've seen this a million times, but you don't go into it with that mindset. And I think that's what separates you when it comes to that curiosity.
Well, I don't go into it saying I've seen it a million times, because, my experience is not exactly the same as someone else. And the curiosity would be, you were in this situation. What did you do? Oh, that is another response. And maybe it's a learning experience for me as to what I could have done or what I could do. But, being being surprised at how somebody reacts to a situation that you've been in encourages you to dig deeper, to find out, why they did that, what motivates them, who that person is. And I think, as you say, curiosity encourages you to learn. There's a short story, and I'll just, tell it quickly, and it relates to not just politics, but business. One of my key components of my 3 to Thrive is education. My 3 to Thrive are get up every day, kick at it, you know, document what I'm doing, and continuously educate myself, because I don't want to reinvent the wheel. And there's so much knowledge that I can learn from. Human beings, people are the only animals that actually can learn from other people's experiences. Other, animals know their own experience. They don't have, at least cognitive language like we do, but we can read books, we can see movies, we can, learn from other people's mistakes. The quick story is about Bill Gates going on a vacation to Hawaii with his wife. This is obviously before they were divorced, and maybe a reason why they got divorced, because they're going on to a vacation to Hawaii a couple of weeks, and he reads 13 books in 14 days. But he's one of the great minds of our time, and he, reads to learn, to know what the next thing coming around the bend is. He might have spent a little bit more time with his wife in Hawaii and not reading, but that is for other people to debate. Point is that education is critical. Learning from other people is important. So I've always been curious, and I always like to learn from other people through conversation.
So I appreciate you mentioning that story regarding books, because it's interesting to me. And I'd love to know more of the psychology of this, but I can tell a difference when it comes to my communication when I am in the process of reading a book or not. It's amazing to me. So there are times in my life where I will block off a certain time in the evening to read. And then there are times where life gets in the way and I'm not doing that at that moment. I can tell a difference when it comes to my ability to connect with others while I'm reading. And I think part of it is because I'm learning. I have different stories that are coming out of the text that I can relate to more people, because it expands my lens. So I appreciate you mentioning the book piece. I do want to shift gears back to something I had mentioned that I really wanted to touch on this, because you talked about trying to see something from someone else's perspective because it's their experience. And, it's so powerful how empathy can connect us with others, people that have gone through experiences. They understand how to empathize with others, but it does come from often substantial pain, where we know how to empathize because we've been there. We know how to connect. I mean, there are experiences in my life that have been really painful, and it's amazing my ability to connect with someone based on that pain. Like, I I'm sure you know this, Terrence, last year, my family experienced a very bad flood in the area that caused major damage to my house. So now when I'm scrolling through channels and I see different news images on a screen, even if it's thousands of miles away, when I see images of a city flooded, that hits me differently now, because I understand what it's like to lose a lot based on flooding. But that comes back to the pain element. So I want you to talk about that, because going through life where you are, you had to experience a lot of setbacks, different failures, many elements of pain, aspects of sorrow. Do you believe that that has positioned you to have the empathy to connect with others? And then if so, what words of encouragement would you share with individuals listening regarding them embracing the empathy as a superpower that they may have now based on that pain and sorrow?
Well, this is a great topic, Matt, because pain generates empathy. And there are studies that show that the most empathetic people on the planet are those who have been tortured. And once you have been tortured, I mean severe torture where you thought you may have not live or not, and other people are, you know, implying or putting pain upon you. You come out of that situation and you have I don't know, your empathy, your compassion for other people has expanded. When you're talking about pain going through situations, it once again it does make you more sensitive to people, to humanity. You have been in that situation where you've had floodwaters in your house, floodwaters in your community. So it's not something you can pass over lightly. That feeling is generated when you read about somebody else or hear about somebody else. That feeling comes back. So and it's I guess a life fully lived cannot be lived without pain. You're going to bump up against the wall, you're going to scrape your knee in the fall, you're going to learn from a painful situation. You might have a business that fails, you might have a product that doesn't launch as you thought it would be. All these situations that involve pain, are not in the long run negative experiences, because if you're willing to look at them as learning opportunities, then the next time you encounter something similar, you're older, you're wiser, your point of view is larger, and maybe you're willing to learn from somebody else that you weren't willing to learn from because you thought you knew it all and you had not gone through that pain point. So pain is a purifier, and pain is a great teacher, and pain is the basis of empathy.
And isn't it amazing that individuals that are out there sharing a lot of stories as they're going through a painful experience, that's a story that they can add to their story bank, where they can capture that story to share with others. It's amazing. And I've shared this before on this podcast with other guests. So people that listen week by week, they might be getting a little bit bored of this example, but I think it's so important to recognize it and actually do something with it, not just hear it for the same again, but also taking it and adding action to it. So I always like to talk about stand-up comedians, one in particular, my favorite, who's Jerry Seinfeld. And one of the things about Jerry Seinfeld is, as he's going through his day-to-day life, he asks himself one question: where is the funny in this? So he takes copious notes. He's always carrying, pen and paper with him. For those listening that aren't into pen and paper, you could do it with your phone as well. There's different applications, but he's constantly going through an experience and asking himself, where's the funny in this? So if he's at the grocery store, if he's witnessing something, maybe watching something take place, he's asking himself in all these instances, where is the funny? When it comes to us in our lives, as it pertains to business, whether it pertains to us with nonprofit work or the political world, whatever, we need to ask ourselves, where is the story in this? Where's the story in this that I can utilize to connect with an audience in a deeper way? So I had mentioned briefly regarding the flood. Well, clearly, there's a lot of stories I could share with what that meant for my family and I. I've shared those stories. So I've connected with others. You had mentioned, kind of bring it back to your first point, Terence, regarding trust and likability. The one-on-one stories, I've shared that story with others. It's made a deeper connection with others. In addition, I've shared that in printed form on social media. That went viral. I posted a picture of the devastating flooding that my town was experiencing based on a story. It destroyed my entire office. There's a ton of damage that it caused. I shared that. It went viral. There were so many people that were reaching out to me regarding that story. It was incredible. So my point is, I could have sat with it with sorrow, but I've learned over the years through some great communicators, don't let a great story go to waste. Utilize that story for growth. And I did use it in a business way. I actually got inbound leads from sharing that story on LinkedIn. So can you talk about that, Terence, regarding going about your day-to-day life and taking notes and properly documenting stories, the importance of that?
Well, 2 points. One thing I'd like to underscore or highlight is the fact that Jerry Seinfeld carried materials so that he could actually write. And writing is so key to understanding what's going on around you, what's going on inside of you, and the stories you actually have. And when you're just living your life going from moment to moment, from task to task, you sometimes miss the importance of a moment that just transpired. But if you have time to reflect, you have time to write it down, you have time to think about it, then it crystallizes into a message, into a learning experience, into a teaching. So I would encourage all those people in business to make notes, whether it's contemporaneous notes with a notebook as you're going along, or at the end of the day, or at the beginning of the day, writing about some aspect of your life, trying to understand through the writing, how you can make your business better, or what experience you had that you can learn from. And then the other thing about stories and the kind of stories that people are sharing sometimes on social media, where they make everything drenching with hyperbole about how great it is, how much money they're making, how many likes they're getting, and so on. And it's not really authentic. And, people want to hear authentic stories that they can relate to. Something happened that went wrong. It was a flood. The car stopped. Some even more painful stories that people share are going to touch and resonate with some people out there. And that's all you want to do. You don't need to resonate with everybody out there. You're only looking for those folks that resonate to this particular aspect of life, of humanity. So tell your stories, but tell them truthfully. Tell the things that haven't worked as well as, some things that did. So people will start to believe you and trust you more because you're authentic, and that will enhance your brand.
Incredibly wise words. Thank you. I appreciate you sharing that. And I appreciate this conversation. And I appreciate all the conversations we've had this far, capturing elements of your journey through storytelling. So thank you so much, Terence. I got a lot out of this conversation. I actually got 5 things out of this conversation in particular that I want to highlight. So I know other listeners might have gotten other elements, but I got 5 different things out of this conversation. First and foremost, you mentioned trust and likability, the importance of not only being on a stage and connecting with whether it's hundreds or thousands of people, but the sheer importance of connecting with someone one-on-one through listening and then storytelling. That really builds that trust and likability. I appreciate the second point you mentioned, which was the theatrical piece. It's the delivery. And I want people listening, the next time you watch someone that you view as a great speaker, also think about the content. Is the content really masterful, or are they just so good at delivery with their theatrics that is why you view them as a great speaker? It's very important regarding delivery. I appreciate the verbiage you mentioned. Excitement is like a drug. regarding dopamine hits. That's one of the reasons why people love scrolling on their phone. They're constantly getting dopamine hits. If we can spike people's dopamine in a story, presenting, connecting to them, they remember that. People love to be excited. Speaking of people, the fourth point, you said liking people. That goes back to your curiosity when it comes to people. And then the fifth point that I don't want people to miss is you saying pain generates empathy. Such a powerful line. So I appreciate everything that you mentioned. If people listening want to get more information on you, what you do, they want to reach out to you for your services, where's the best place they can go to get that information?
Well, Matt, the best place to find me is on LinkedIn. Some unusual spelling, not typical in my first name, 3 E's, 1 R. But if you would just put a link to my LinkedIn profile in the comments, people will be able to reach out and find me there. There's contact information, my email, and we can continue this conversation or start new ones through that link.
Perfect. I will include your link in the show notes. People could just click and go from there. Thanks again, Terence. I very much appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Matt, for having me once again.
Thank you for listening to the Stories with Traction podcast. Please leave a review, since positive reviews will make it easier for others to find this conversation. Next episode will launch on Friday at 8 a.m. Eastern. Until then, remember, if you want to persuade with power and inspire those around you to action, you must share more stories.